Enthusiasts. I am John Hobday, the president this year and fearless leader for the moment. Just a quick announcement for the members that this is the final week of the 5960 fundraiser, the February Share the Love campaign. Goal is 200,000. I do not have an update on where we are at this point. Kirk, by chance, did you see anything over email?
I have not.
Yeah, I'm not sure where we are on that. We had talked about maybe a goal of 100% member participation, even if it's 10 or 20 bucks. And the link is on the bottom, rotary.org/en for English /donate and designate.
Can I ask a question?
Your club.
John?
You sure can, yeah.
I went on the site and to make a donation. And when we did this last year, we designated the polio fund. And I see that this year it looks like there are 4 different categories that you can donate. One is polio, one is sort of the general fund. And does it make any difference which one we choose?
Chris Ann, what would you say about that? I think you've been around
the
fundraisers the longest.
Yeah, let me look. You guys can keep talking about other stuff.
And then with with designating our club, do we just say 5960 or do we designate the E-Club? What do we do?
You'd say the E-Club, yeah, 5960 E-Club, and they'll get it in the right spot.
Okay.
Or E-Club of Cultural Exchange Enthusiasts, but
Yeah.
Karin, when the leader of this campaign spoke to us, he asked us this year to make it for the general fund.
Okay.
This email, the latest email I received says, and it has a push button and it says donate now to annual fund.
Yep. And I found it easiest if I went to myrotary.com, signed in there. Then there's no questions as to which club you belong to or whatever. Everything about you is there already.
Got it.
And then it tracks you as well, right?
Right. And it tells him that you've given your money. So that's really the best way to do it. Do it through myrotary.com.
Okay,
sure.
thank you.
And what was, Greg, do you remember the rationale for donating to the general fund as opposed to one of the other areas?
The other areas, the more specific funds are rather unusual for this particular fundraising time. So they might ask for Polio Plus, for example, in November, but they do the annual fund at the beginning of the year. And this year they decided to, because so much money went to Polio Plus last year, I think they decided this year to do the annual fund.
And with the foundation, just as a review, the money is held for 3 years to create interest.
Mm-hmm.
And then the principal comes back
and
half to the district and half to Rotary International. Is that it?
And John, being a nonprofit nudge and a foundation nudge, it's not interest, it's income. You got to be very careful about using that term interest. Nobody makes interest to speak of anymore. They do income.
Okay.
With the it's a fairly complicated formula. Christiane, you perhaps can help me with this, but it's my understanding that this money will go to the foundation for 3 years. And then after 3 years, whatever money is raised in this annual fund giving from this district will come back to this district in total. Part of it will be income off the overall Rotary Foundation monies, and part of it will be from income from these monies given this year. But in total, we'll get all that money. The equivalent of that amount of money will be returned to the district in special projects.
Great. Sounds good. Well, thanks for those who have donated, and for the members who have not, if you can pitch in 5, 10, 20 more, whatever you'd like to do, just something so that we're nicely represented. Very good. And again, this goes through the end, technically through the end of February. Something tells me that on Monday morning, they might still accept your donation. I'm not really sure about that, but I think maybe that would be okay. But if you're a deadline-driven, that was a joke. If you're a deadline-driven person, Sunday night is the deadline. Very good. So new members are always welcome. We, as a new club have a goal of 25 members by the end of the year, calendar year 2021. So we're currently about half of that. And so if anyone is interested, if you're a non-member on the call today, you'd like to be a formalized part of our club and be part of, our weekly get together, our friendship, our service, and just being a part of Rotary, please consider joining. And then if you're also, for those unaware, if you are a member of another formal Rotary club, you can become a friend of our e-club, our cultural exchange e-club, for $100 donation. You're helping to support a new Rotary club. You have access to every meeting. And for those interested in makeups, you have access to that as well. So, Jasmine, I messed these darn things up. Oh, this is next week's. Is next week, Jasmine? Chrisanne?
No, next week is you.
Next week is me. Yep. Okay. I've shared the wrong one. Okay. Talk amongst yourselves for just a moment. I was ahead of myself by, so what's new? Someone,
Yesterday, I talked to the president of the Brookings, South Dakota club, and he told me that Rotary International had decided not to have any international exchanges for the next school year. And that's what he had heard from District 5610. So I said, well, I have not heard that yet. I would love to fact check this with with my friends here. So have you heard anything about next year?
Well, we have John and Greg and I attended the NIAN conference this weekend, and that decision is going to be coming in March. They have not made the decision yet.
Okay, that's good to know because my committee is working on all the virtual pieces.
I know.
I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, they're going to make it in March.
Okay.
Thank you.
that's what I heard at the conference as well. I mean, maybe there's a decision that's been made behind the scenes that we're unaware of, but the official message of the conference this past weekend was that nothing had yet been decided.
And they announced that the final decision is going to be made by the RI board in March. What I suspect is going to happen is they're going to say, we will start exchanging September of 2022, so that clubs, groups, areas, multi-districts should start recruiting this summer, doing interviews as per normal in December for North Star, and do orientation in Rihanna starting in January of 2022 is what I suspect is going to happen, with the plan of kids being sent out in August of 2022. That's what I have heard. That is not a decision. That's only what I've heard.
It was my impression. I also attended many of the conference sessions, and it was my impression that that the start would be with short-term exchange. I mean, I got the distinct impression from listening to it that might be the piece that gets rolling first. And there was also a lot of talk about virtual exchange.
Yeah, I heard, there's a lot about virtual exchange as well. What did you think of that concept?
I think that hats off. First of all, I thought that the conference was excellent. I thought that the MC, the speakers were incredible. I feel incredible. I mean, talk about feeling like an underachiever. I mean, after listening to the speakers, and I thought that the MC was phenomenal. She did an amazing job of handling the virtual conference. I think that it's really imperative there are things that I never thought that I would embrace in the pandemic world. And yet we need to embrace these things. And it's not the way we envision exchange, but it's something. It's something. And I admire their innovation, and I admire their ability to think outside the box. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Well, thanks.
For those who don't know, on the Rotary International site, I was admonished several times, we're not supposed to say the term RI, we're supposed to say Rotary International. On the RI site are training modules for virtual exchanges and for short-term exchanges. I too heard that short-term change was going to be the first of the in-person exchanges. Virtual exchange is going on right now. I don't know what North Star is doing. Rihanna, you might know more than I, but it's my understanding that virtual exchange is ongoing, that the kids who were signed up for short-term exchange in North Star were converted at their option to a virtual exchange. Some of them worked very well and some of them did not work as well, but you know, that happens with everything. And as early as January 2020, they might start, districts might start thinking of short-term exchange in person, especially with the Southern Hemisphere. Of course, a lot of it depends upon when a country is willing to take Americans. And, you know, this country is willing today and that country is not willing today, but they might open in 3 months, they might open in 6 months, I don't know. So a lot of it depends upon the country and a lot of it depends upon RI. And as Karin said, I mean, they're thinking outside the box. They really want, at least at NIAN, they really, really want this to continue. What I think we as a club should think about is they had the current Rotary president, who I think is the first time ever the current Rotary president spoken to NIAN. They had an immediate past president, and they had next year's president, and they had the 2-year president for whatever it is from now. And they all said, all of them to a person, male, female, American and Indian, etc., that youth exchange is one of the most important programs in Rotary International. Nobody was a Guinness, so to speak. Everybody was way in favor of trying to figure a way out as soon as possible to bring the program back. And of course, the epidemic is way beyond Rotary International's control or any of our control, but
Right.
that they sure want it to happen as soon as safely possible. And they all said number one important item above everything else is the safety of the exchange students.
So true. I also found it interesting the number of districts who were very adamant about restarting in some form, no matter what, even if that was virtual, and how other districts were very adamant about just delaying. So it's just, I think it's very individualized. I kind of wonder too if it's going to really differ by area of the world. You know, Australia and New Zealand, by virtue of having much bigger control over everything disease-wise, if they'll start to exchange with, you know, if there'll be just country by country differences. So we'll see what happens.
Thank you for sharing about the convention. Do you know if anything was recorded?
I thought sessions were going to be recorded, but I think, did I see something where the plenaries were not recorded, but the sessions were recorded?
I think all the breakouts were recorded.
All the breakouts were recorded, is my understanding. And I think you can find everything on YouTube that they have recorded under NIAN 2021. And so it's easily accessible to everyone. But I think John is correct. I think none of the plenaries are being disseminated, which is
too bad. They were quite good.
They were really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll also kick in. I went to the Rotex breakout on meetup on Sunday, and there were Rotex there from all over the world. I mean, everything. What I personally noted was, and I don't know how far back this goes, but certainly when I went abroad, everybody either came from the United States and Canada or went to the United States and Canada, but there were so it was a center hub and then a dispersion issue. Nobody in Sweden when I was there was not from the United States or Canada, and Sweden exchanged with no other country other than those two, the United States and Canada. Nowadays, I met these kids from Mexico who went to Taiwan and Poland,
right.
and kids from Hungary who went to Gainesville, Florida, and all over the place. It was just wonderful to see how diverse the program is. At the same time, it's interesting to me that the lingua franca for everybody is English. No
Mm.
matter where they started, no matter where they went to, they spoke English. And that was very interesting. Of course, that is part of NIAN. I mean, NIAN is North American, right? The other thing is that the first time, and Chrisanne, you can correct me, certainly every plenary and almost every breakout was translated simultaneously. Is that correct? Into Spanish? And I've never seen that before. And so they really, really want to reach out and embrace the people from Mexico. For the younger Rotex, Maggie and others, I noticed that they strongly encouraged Rotex Mexico, Rotex Brazil, as a separate organization, Rotex Canada, and North American Rotex as an umbrella organization for the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And then how smoothly North American Rotex worked with Rotex International. So that was very interesting.
Thank you, everyone. Maggie, I'm so sorry about that. You know what? I had this perfectly prepared. I just pulled the wrong one up. I was trying to get ahead of myself, so I prepared like 3 anyway. Welcome to our speaker today, Maggie, Rotary exchange student to France, and has a presentation for us. Just a quick note that I will be it'll be my makeup member introduction next week. And from what was rescheduled in January, but I wanted to let people know that the Rotary magazine will be doing a feature article on the e-club, and the writer is either going to attend next week or the week after. So if you guys can make a special attempt to be on one of the next 2 or both of the next 2 calls, would love to have a nice group for him when he attends. So without further ado, Maggie, sorry for that delay, and take it away.
All right, thanks so much, John. I'm just gonna share my screen here. I've got a presentation for all of you. All right, is that looking good for everybody? You can see my pixelated picture. That's a little cheesy, but I still like it. So yeah, thanks so much for having me here. Chrisanne mentioned, or she reached out, and when we were connected, it was because I had given a similar speech to my local Rotary Club in Northfield. And we both came to the conclusion in our email correspondence that this group is right up my alley. So future member right here. Yeah, and actually there's the kind of a second conclusion, which is more of a reflection on my part. And that's that this pandemic, I swear, has just been starving me of connections with people like you guys. And we all share this kind of wonder of other cultures, and we question the world around us. And there's this immense interest in connecting with others who don't share our same points of view or backgrounds. And so you could say that one of the positives of having to move from where I was working and living in Vancouver, Canada, back to Minnesota to be with family is I do get to meet all of you. So although it's virtual, I am very grateful for that. And, you know, I am really grateful for platforms like Zoom, like this. We do get to be together and it enables that, but we can feel so disconnected, even though we're plugged in all the time, right? We have different social norms and practices, and we're all learning all of these things at the same time and getting into the monotony of that. And we now more than ever are deeply connected across the globe through those major common threads like the pandemic. But you might also find yourself, like me, questioning those news sources more than ever, not knowing what information is the right information. So when you're sifting through all of this, trying to make sense of what's going on and what can actually make all the difference is gaining that understanding through these challenges, and actually forging the genuine connections with one another, even if it is online. So this is kind of something that I've been focused on and really developing throughout this pandemic. So I'm here to offer you a new perspective and possibly a new tool to help with building equity and community in this virtual age that we now live in. And this tool is called graphic recording. It's also known as visual note-taking. And I'm just going to be sharing about how, like what I do, I guess, and also how my exchange through Rotary actually led this to be the skill that I developed, or almost kind of like a paleontologist or someone. I'm just kind of chipping away at those things that were, it was always there, but it really revealed itself to me. So there are three things that I do simultaneously. I'm listening, I'm synthesizing, and I'm documenting. So this is either on an iPad, which I do virtually, or it's with this huge like 8-foot piece of paper and markers, and I'm just like going to town and I get in my Zen mode. And I'm just going to give you kind of a little view of what it looks like when it's done in real time. And this kind of gives you an idea of, you know, being visual thinkers, a lot of us, what this really is. So this is the time-lapse version of a graphic recording that I just did a couple of months ago for a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant here in Minneapolis. And that was on community engagement. So it's the combination of those notes and visuals, and I'm synthesizing to capture emotions, the learnings, process, sorry, the Canadian part of me is coming out in the accent, and the themes of the conversation that typical note-taking doesn't really capture, right? So it's often done in real time so that participants of a conference or meeting can see that they're actually contributing to something bigger. You know, they're able to make those connections for themselves as well and see, oh yeah, like this is something that I could build off of in my next comment or question, or I can think more deeply about what we're talking about as a group. And part of it is just seeing yourself in what's happening. You know, you don't want to just, you don't want to just feel like you are listening blankly to someone talking at you. It's more of we're co-creating something together. So it also helps a conversation if I'm involved in the planning. And these are images that are just kind of popping up in my head because I think very visually. I was always the kid with the notebook, drawing, doodling, but remembering everything that the teacher said, and testing out different fonts and stuff in my handwriting that became obnoxious, but that's okay. And so, yeah, I'm really just kind of spacing things out in real time. I don't know what it's going to look like in the end. It's really about feeling what the conversation is what's happening in that conversation. You know, what are those pathways that are happening between point A to point B? What sparked an idea, or, you know, where can I draw an arrow where someone made a connection? So this is something I actually did just last week. So this is a client's huge group of gatherings. So they had 3 different gatherings up top. I know you can't see them very well, it's hard to show. But there were 3 different gatherings of 70 people per gathering. And what I did was we had this great back and forth of breaking out into sessions, and, you know, they were able to converse with themselves and have some anonymity. I think some people get a little bit afraid to speak out in big groups like that, and yet we want to connect, right? And so you have that anonymity in the small groups, and then you allow people to share back if they want to. And then I'm capturing alongside those conversations some of the highlights, and I can preserve that anonymity, but I can also make it more engaging so people see that was my quote or that was my connection that I made. And all the while it's incrementally shown to them throughout the day. So it's not just something that, like, you're kind of seeing this with fresh eyes, and for them it's really, we're creating this almost story together. So yeah, and then what I did was I actually synthesized all 3 of those top graphic recordings, and I created a final one. And this organization, it's spanning 2 different provinces, and they are trying to create an identity, very new. And so they asked me, can you create an identity out of 3 different conversations, 2 different provinces, a couple hundred people? And so this was my interpretation of their reflections on the past year, some of the poll results, and then some of the themes that came out of the conversations. So that's just one of the many ways that I've used graphic recording. So a little bit about me. You'll see the Rotary, you know, pictures and the typical, like, standing in front of or behind the flag, and my very unfilled Rotary vest there, or my Rotary jacket, which became heavy with pins and flags and all sorts of things by the end. So I mentioned that I went to Puget-Sarrazins, France, and that was back in 2012. And I was able to actually develop this understanding of participatory governance and conversation over a decade ago. And it developed because of a Rotarian in a neighboring Rotary club that said something that I'll never forget. So this is the guy on the right. And I can't remember his name for the life of me, but he told me that he would travel frequently and he wouldn't really look for those similarities in a person, but rather those differences. So you might be thinking, well, that's kind of counterproductive. Shouldn't we be finding those similarities and connecting on those things? And he said, no, like I actually want to find what those differences are, because he was interested in, why does someone have a different opinion than me? So he always asked that question, why? He was always wondering, why is it that I think differently than someone else with a different background or culture? And to me, this question really sparked from that curiosity and openness is the fundamental building block to peace. And I just recently attended this Rotary International webinar, and they were talking about adaptive peace building tools. And I raised my hand and I said, well, what about graphic recording? And so we talked about it as this group from all over the world, and they were thinking, oh my gosh, like we need to be doing this a lot more, because it centers around the person, right? And it still represents while leading us through a pathway of understanding together. So I wielded kind of what I learned from that Rotarian, almost like a pair of glasses, essential to making sense of my surroundings that were always changing. I was there during political elections, and I went to the University of British Columbia. This is what I was mentioning earlier. I wanted to get away from the US so I could do my own taxes, really. Have some independence from what I had always known. And so I went to get my bachelor's in international relations, and I continued asking why. I wanted to know why people had different opinions and different backgrounds that led them to different decisions. And so as a student, I volunteered in one of the most impoverished postal codes in North America. It's called the Downtown East Side. And this actually helped me discover my skill of graphic recording. And it led to my current job at Realize Strategies, where I engage members. We're a co-op. I engage with our partners and community members who are also purpose-driven leaders, and we learn from one another to create solutions to systemic issues through a program I've called Real Talk, and also some of my consulting work that I've been doing. So I also spoke earlier about what I'm grateful for, and it's a bit ironic too. My passion is in storytelling. It's literally like in the title, right? And when I was younger, I was made fun of, like straight up made fun of for being a bad storyteller. So here's another thing I'm grateful for. Thank goodness I finally learned what I was good at, and that's helping others tell their stories. So a little bit of kind of going back in time. So growing up, I was often interpreting the world for my sister. Her name's Kelly, so she's on the left here. Here's my mom. And I was always making sure that she was included in conversations. She was always on the periphery, right? Nobody would ask her to be engaged in it. And she's on the autism spectrum. And so she has this beautiful and intricate way of seeing things that I understand, but not everybody else can. So she can't always express herself in ways that people understand. But growing up, she was also bullied for that. Because of those misunderstandings, and that's where conflict comes from. That's that peace building piece. So in 2010, I had this want to lead an anti-bullying campaign where I created a participatory art project that was at the Northfield High School. And so people would reflect upon and pledge towards anti-bullying efforts at Northfield High School. Because I wanted to show my sister, it's not only that I hear her, but others did too. And we really stood in solidarity. So long story short, it's pretty amazing. This led to us attending the first summit on bullying prevention at the White House in 2011. And then there was this bill that actually strengthened laws against bullying in Minnesota the following year. So it went from just being this 37-word document to a 40-page document and a plan of action. So I saw that this power in using pieces like graphic recording or participatory visualization in governance, it's a way to really make change in our communities. So I'm actually looking into, how is this an adaptive peace building tool? How can we do this on a policy change level? And it's really why I love what I do. And there's so many, tons of benefits. This is like, I've created a list of like 25 or more benefits, but I wanted to highlight a couple of these. So out of all of those things that I've been talking about, I wanted to focus on accessibility that graphic recording can allow, fostering trust, building ownership of the participants, and then promoting deeper understanding for long-lasting change. And I'll go through these fairly quickly just because I want to make sure that we have some time to chat. It wouldn't be very participatory of me if I just talked the whole time. And I love hearing what people have, if they have aha moments and things like that. So the first one is just, I mentioned I was in one of the poorer neighborhoods of all of North America. And this is the UBC Learning Exchange, which is located in the downtown east side of Vancouver. And they do this amazing thing where they train community members to be facilitators that teach English as a second language to their neighbors. So that's also called asset-based community development, so ABCD, if you're curious. And I wanted to invite, or I was invited by them to a facilitator feedback session to graphically record their input. So you could see, they could send out a survey, but when you think about accessibility, some of these folks don't have computers. They don't have access to internet freely. And maybe they don't have typing skills. We taught that at this place. And so what I did was I was there on the sidelines, not taking up space, but really just recording what they were talking about, keeping that anonymous. And it was incredible because some of the people that were there, we'd pause and they would come up and look at all of the visuals that I was creating and say, that was me, that was me. And I remember one woman, I think it was Yolanda, and she goes, I want to add something. Can I have you add this to what I said? And it was just so cool to have everyone take ownership of that, but also have that accessibility to shaping their facilitation practice. So the next one is a legal center that I worked on a project with, and this was for women who are often immigrants or refugees, and they're experiencing domestic violence, so they get free services for legal support. And I was invited to their feedback session as well. And anonymity is so important for something like this, and so we had to have this trust. I was in the room, and there was someone on on a call, video calling in, and so having those breaks where the women could actually go up and see, yes, that's my story, but you're also, I trust you to be filtering out, my identifying information is so important. And then this was actually used as a document to gain further grants and continue the funding of this organization. I'll go through this one really quickly, but there's this really cool organization that it's called EdMico, and I was able to help some post-secondary, or I guess they're 19 plus immigrant refugee youth who've aged out of certain government aid. We actually mapped out their journey, like what's their past, what's their present, what's their future. And they were stunned when I invited them to actually draw it on the graphic recording I was creating. And it's this huge 4x8 foot sheet of paper. And they're like, oh, but I'm going to ruin it. And I said, no, this is yours. Like, we're creating this together. And so they all took their markers and were creating their own visuals of what they wanted their life to be like, even though they've come for, awful reasons, they've had to leave their homes. And so creating their own home and being able to visualize that was such a therapeutic and inspiring experience for me, as well as them. And lastly, this is one that I recently did for Real Talk, which I mentioned. And we redefined what diversity, equity, and inclusion in a workplace looked like. So we've never really paired, I don't think anybody's paired it this way, but looking at diversity as a hiring piece, inclusion as a governance and culture piece, and then also equity as a procurement topic. So it was really interesting to take a concept and visualize it and learn something from that. So remember our current state where we felt disconnected and didn't know where our information was coming from and didn't know where we all connected. Well, I wanted to leave a few things with you, just some ideas to carry you throughout the day, the week, future. Because I wanted to note that we can actually feel connected. We can actually get accurate information and we can build things together and not feel so, apart during these times. So we gather for a reason. These are our opportunities to listen. The UBC Learning Exchange example that I gave you was that they allowed their facilitators to have an opportunity to set them up for success. EdMeCo gave refugee youth a blank canvas so they could dream up their own futures, and they weren't told how they could or could not accomplish something. And if you ask those you directly serve what they need, you just need to be willing to see things from their point of view. And empathy can go a really long way. And maybe this is, your employees or your community members, your colleagues. Really ask yourself, why are you gathering in the first place? Or why are you creating a document or process? Are people, are the people that this will directly affect actually be involved in the process? And I know those are kind of, it's very reminiscent of the 4-way test in Rotary. So when facing a challenge, wield a marker. This is one of my favorites because I always tell people my superpower is that you can give me a concept or something that's just been challenging you for weeks. And this is something that I love doing a test on. If I can't visualize it, at least there's something that's missing. So let's try and visualize it and work out those pieces that don't quite fit. And this is something you can do too. So if you are considering what does the path from point A to point B look like? What are you trying to solve to, what do you need to get to that solution point? What might you encounter along the way? It's about those between spaces as well, not just those points. So I encourage you to grab a piece of paper and pen at some point and try and work out a problem that way. And lastly, make the people you serve a leading role in the story because it's theirs. So it's really easy to have the people with the checkbook or the people in positions of power write that story. But if you think about the work that you do as a storybook, you have to remember who the protagonist is. How are they being represented? Are they telling their story in the first person? What do they look like? We know that representation matters and that ownership and belonging is the backbone of community. So it's our way forward together. Something that I've been thinking a lot about is that I want to leave you with an image of your typical notes. It's a typed document that's black and white, but it's not black, brown, autistic, old, young. It's not representative all the time of the community that you are trying to tell a story about. So consider that. Maybe it's a graphic recording that tells you what the real picture and that real story is. I'm done.
Maggie, thank you so much. That's awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
I'm doing the clapping for the group. Everyone's on mute. Yeah. So yeah, thanks so much. Just really, yeah, I'm the black and white. When you said that, I have notes sitting right here on my desk that are just all black and white. And I don't, unlike you, think visually, but I'm going to start to try to doodle a little more and try to put pictures together maybe in meetings. And yeah, so I'm just gonna open it up for some questions. I have questions, but Stephanie and Sam are off of mute. Did you have a question or are you just off of mute?
I think
Oh, you're standing as well. Are you? That's nice. Everyone's standing. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for this presentation. And I don't know if anyone is connected with the program committee for NIAN, but this could be a plenary session for NIAN. This was awesome.
It was awesome.
Awesome. And it really does challenge, like John, I don't think visually. I'm a very linear thinker. And so when you suggest, I remember one time talking to Greg about a problem I was having with one of my dogs, training a dog. And Greg said to me, well, you're thinking like a human, you have to think like a dog. And yeah, I still don't get that. And, and the dog's still really naughty. But and Maggie, so when you talk about thinking visually, I don't even know, it's as if you're speaking a foreign language to me. Can you help us grasp that?
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. So it's so weird because it's just like a second language to me, like you said. So when someone is giving me the rundown of, like, let's say we're talking about a project, they're like, I want my my strategic plan to be showing this and this and this, like, here's the Excel spreadsheet. And I'm like, what's important to you? So I'll ask them things like, what's most important to you? Who is this for? How do you want them represented? And it starts creating this picture because I'm having them think visually. So for someone who thinks better in Excel spreadsheets, or you do really well with that hard data, whereas I'm like, yeah, I want to make that really nice and cool and fun and like play with it a bit. I need to ask those questions because it forms this relationship between the information and what you're trying to get out of it. So for me, it's really like asking those questions so that I can understand what are those links between the data and maybe some imagery that makes sense to a bunch of people, right? Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it is a real paradigm shift. It is a real paradigm shift. And, but I can see how helpful it would be for an organization to engage in that process.
Lindy.
Hi, Maggie. Thank you so much. That was incredible. And you are a very talented artist, which does a great job of portraying your storytelling. Are you in Canada now or Northfield now?
I'm in Northfield. Yeah, I've been here since March, just with family.
And what came to mind for me was a nonprofit that's in St. Paul that works a lot with helping diversity. It's been more focused originally on Indigenous people, but they're branching out into sexuality and just being representative of all people. And I feel like you might be able to have some interesting conversations and really help them visualize. Are you taking referrals with your
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
I'll reach out to them or you and see if I can make a meaningful connection there.
Yeah, I was going to mention too, I think what's something that I missed in the conversation is a lot of these groups, I've been working with refugees and folks who have come to Canada, specifically in that one neighborhood. They've come to Canada and they're learning English as a second language, but something that translates so well is those images, right? And so we talked about this being kind of a second language. Well, visuals can be a second language to people, or it helps you at least kind of glean the information a little bit better. And so when you're using symbols and you're using imagery to make sense of something that's kind of forming, or you're trying to find an identity, whether it has to do with Indigenous identity or sexuality. Those can be really important to a group of people. And even if you don't identify with that, it helps you understand from their perspective what it is that is important. Thanks for your questions. These are great.
Do you, in a meeting, are you taking, are you drawing with the pen and then do you translate that later? You'd mentioned an iPad. Or are you literally doing your graphic design, I'll call it, or the visual representation there at the meeting as the meeting is progressing?
Yeah, it's literally happening as people are talking. So I have to hold all of these thoughts that are continuously moving. It's almost like there's two timelines, the one that's actually happening and the one that is like my brain processing, but they're like happening kind of like that, So I have to markers and, it's helpful to have Post-it notes, but I'm doing all of this on my iPad. So then I'll just share my screen and it'll be like, hey, here's progress so far. And then we'll do another, bit of the meeting and then I'll show progress later on. But that's kind of how it works. Yeah.
I wanted to follow up on that because I was having trouble just visualizing. I kind of get stuck in weeds all the time and details. And so I see the final look, but like what John was just asking, what are you actually doing? So as you are creating on your iPad, are those, like you didn't use a font, right? This is and then you're making a person and you're making the tree. So when you showed us, I'm following along because you're nodding, so I'm just going to continue talking. So that first big one that you showed us and something popped up and then something popped up and then the background turned to color and how do you do all that?
Yeah.
It's funny too, because I just learned how to use the iPad back in June. I've been doing this just for a bit and it's just out of curiosity, to be honest. So let's see. I don't know if you can see my screen very well, but nope. So this is just like on my iPad, this is what it looks like from a bird's eye view, but what you don't see are all of these layers all down here. So if I expand that, there are all of these little pieces that I can move around and I'm making every little piece individually, right? So
is that a program or is that just a feature built into every iPad?
No, it's called Procreate. I think it's like $8. So I have like an Apple Pencil and I'm just, Olga's just like, what?
Okay, do you use that or are you just excited to hear about it? No.
I just saw you kind of like shake your head like, what?
Yeah.
I'm sure you can use like other things like Adobe Illustrator is now on the iPad as of last fall. So I'm kind of dabbling in that because it just has different functions, but I've just been using Procreate and then it has that cool like time lapse function and it just plays back whatever you've done if you want it.
Rihanna, did you have a question or do you just have yourself off mute? Okay, sounds good. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I do have a question. I was wondering if you could put her contact information in.
Oh, yeah.
In the Zoom, yeah, in the chat. Yeah, for sure. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, this is all very cool. I actually might just buy Procreate if, I like doodling all this. So a few things popped up for me. First of all, this sounds to me like simultaneous interpretation. So people that do simultaneous interpretation is you need to keep those like two simultaneous but lateral feeds going through. And I took a class in it and I was terrible because I wanted to go back and be like, well, actually, so I used one word, but I meant this other word. And like, so in German, this word also has like 5 other meanings, which are really interesting. And they'd be like, no, like, so I think this is amazing. And you're like, I love learning about other people's brains and I just really want to like open yours up and take a peek.
Terrifying.
Anytime. And then the other thing that came up for me is I've seen a little bit of graphic representations to drive conversations used in different ways. So one was I had a student who had used it and then had led a group discussion with my students with it, where they used it as a way to track space in a conversation. So you like gave everybody an image, and then you kind of like drew lines of where the vectors of conversation going, and you could use different colors for different themes or different types of responses, affirming, questioning, tangential, expanding, you know, like all these different. So she was amazing at it. And it actually, we used it for a feedback discussion on group dynamics. And I felt like it gave a lot more richness to the conversation. And people could see a little bit more of how identities they held within the group, how that might affect their participation in the group and their actual participation as perceived. They're like their perception of their participation, other people's perception of the participation. So I think this is excellent. And then the second time I've seen it used, I thought was really interesting, was in a workshop for community participants when I was working in West Africa. And some of the participants were illiterate. And so it was a way of having it fully accessible to everyone. So they would actually have like more, instead of having like an outline of the discussion, they would create like an image of what was being talked about, of things that they wanted to do with their community, because it was about community development. And I thought that was so accessible. And then they'd leave this poster up for the 3 years of the grant. And over time, you'd kind of see people like, yeah, like adding little things like, oh, we, you know, this is actually what our health center looks like, or, oh, wait, I forgot to add my garden in the back, or, you know, so I really connected with that idea of participation in particular. And yeah, I love it. I think it's, what you do is really amazing. And I think that also, I think there's a power in seeing your ideas expressed visually. And I loved how you said that people would go up and be like, oh, that's me. And who knows if that was them or not, you know, it could have been just like a generic community member that you know, drew, but that people find themselves in that. And I think we find that in like, even things like meeting notes, you're like, oh, wait, that was my comment, or an article. So I think that's so wonderful that you give people that voice. And I don't know, we're getting short on time, but I'd be curious to hear if you've personally experienced any differences facilitating this in Canada and with different communities there versus if you've done it here in the US. And I know there's also like regional differences too within Canada, for example.
Yeah,
Thanks, Lindy. Have a great night.
Bye, Lindy. And anybody else is welcome to log off, because yeah, anyways.
Thanks, everybody. So many great points that you made. Yeah, I find that we do have different discussions around Indigenous representation in Canada, but then we also have different conversations around race in the US. I don't know, I just like, I find that, and I can't really put my finger on it quite, but I think it has to do with some of the organizations that I've worked with. So, you know, if they've had training specifically in a traditional welcome or something like that, I'll make sure to include something appropriate and something that's been approved in the visual. So we have an elder at different events for the UBC Learning Exchange, and I represented this quilt that she talked about and all of the aspects of that quilt, and that became the foundation of the graphic recording, which was the foundation of that illustration. And so something like in Minnesota, when we talk about race, like I pointedly asked, how do we want our people on this page to be represented? So having that called out instead of shied away from, I think that's a conversation starter as well. If you see yourself in something that talks about something that you understand or you're dealing with or you relate to, you feel a lot more part of that conversation, and like it's not just contributing to the problem, it's more celebrating something or it's pointing it out. So those are just, you know, some of the big topics that are happening in those different areas, but I'm sure there's so many other things I could come up with, but yeah.
Okay, when you were talking, where my mind was going was inbound orientation. where all of the new inbounds come to Minnesota, Western Wisconsin, where, they're here for 1 month, their language is, it's just hard to communicate, and just this visual, wouldn't that be cool? Just to, as the orientation is unfolding, just sort of visually represented. And then bring that back at other orientations throughout the year, just youth exchange tie-in. Hey guys, I'm going to put up the 4-way test for those of you that have to leave. So Maggie, we end our, if familiar with the Rotary 4-way test, we end our meeting with 4-way test as a great way to kind of go back into out into the world and have this present with us. So everyone can take themselves off of mute. And if we can say the 4-way test together. So the Rotary 4-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it
fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Great to see everyone. I will hang around as long as people want to. Kirk, if you